Check back with you with another episode of Shtisel Man. We're going to do a special episode today focusing on Season 1, specifically recapping the character of Shulem and doing an analysis on Shulem's character. So I'm going to take three examples, all examples that we actually touched on in our review of Season 1 throughout the various episodes of Shtisel Man, and I want to share with you my thinking on what's the underlying personality trait and piece of Shulem, the character Shulem, played marvelously by Dovah Glickman, that can be very instructional for us and edifying. Let's take three examples. Number one, Shulem demanding that his son, the young Kiva, 12 years old, in the bus, remove his eyeglasses so he should not stare at the bare legs of a chiloni, a secular woman. Perhaps he would be aroused or whatnot. Secondly, his rejection of his daughter living in Naria, far away, the Lubavitch girl who went to join a Hasidic sort of sect. I hate to use the word sect, but Hasidic denomination, the Lubavitch denomination, and rejected her because of that. And finally, a more subtle example of his quasi-flirting and quasi-eating with the various almanot, widows, or divorcees who he comes in contact with during his lonely stints and hungry stints as a widower himself. So number one, what is the underlying quality here? And I think it's really an exercising of control because of his own feelings of self-worth and his own negative feelings of his own self. Now, you can also make this determination based on and making a whole exposition on his religiosity. And I could go that way. I could say, well, Shulem, who wears this beard, like this beard that covers who he really is, his religiosity masks his true self and his true negative self-image. But I don't think the issue here is that much about religiosity, although he may cloak it in religiosity. I think the issue is just much more deeper on a very visceral level, a very deep and an early level in his psyche regarding his own feelings of self-worth. Take the example of Kiva, little Kiva in the bus, which I already talked about, but I look at that scene as really, really so instructive in terms of Shulem's character. Essentially, Shulem is looking for control. He's trying to control his son. His son is in a vulnerable state. He's 12. He's going off to yeshiva. He's very vulnerable. And of course, a child wants to have a connection with their father. And he imposes a very strict, almost draconian form of religious stricture upon his son, and his son, as we see in that episode, takes it to a more extreme level. What could you expect of him? But it's really not about so much the religiosity, although that's the mask. It's really about the control. If we look again towards his daughter, who he rejected, okay, all of that, like you reject your daughter, you really, really don't talk to her and don't have a relationship with your grandchildren. What's that about? Is that about religiosity, or is it about control, masked in religiosity? The word that we use in Yiddish is frumkeit or verfrumkeit, which is, being overly religious at others' expense, if you will. But it's really about control. Him controlling a situation, not talking to his daughter, not having a relationship with his grandchildren. And finally, you have the situation of the various widows and divorcees that he flirts with and wants to break bread with. So there, what's really going on is that he's also trying to control the situation. He's trying to have them develop sort of a love or a crush on him. Here he is, the school principal and the long beard and the, the widower and whatnot. And he strings them along. The first girl, Eliza, right? And then continuing on, and we're going to see it in future episodes as well, continuing on with various, subtle flirtations and subtle sort of dalliances with these various women. There again, I think it's about control. He is trying to manipulate them in a position of feeling bounded to him without necessarily consummating a relationship, feeling somewhat in control, somewhat controlling these women's hearts, controlling their desires, if you will, and being in that situation of upmanship or one-upmanship. And I think all these three help us define Shulem the character. And one of the reasons Shtisel resonates so much is because these characters are so true to life. It could be someone wearing a religious beard, that type of mask, or it could be anyone, religious or non-religious, who wears their type of mask in some sort of shita, which is a type of position that they hold, that, we see in Shulem rejecting the daughter, putting the son in an unbearable situation. We see it with his control of Kiva is obvious. I wouldn't even use that example because it's so obvious throughout the whole series, his control of Kiva. But I wanted to give these other examples because they're a little bit more subtle and they really show what this character is about. And so it's not so much that he's doing it in a manner of what we call frumkeit or religiosity, although that's part of it, but it's really the deeper down feelings of insecurity, feelings of low self-worth, whatever that is, that leads him to this sort of narcissistic position that's actually really narcissism that's rooted in a very, very low self-worth. And that's how we see Shulem's character. With all that in mind, we have a little bit of we have an affinity and we have a little bit of rachmanut, like mercy on him, because we know his heart is there. We see his heart. You see it in the last episode where he, at the school dinner, where he talks about his mother's love for those characters on TV. We see the real heart. This guy's got a lot of heart and a lot of stuff in him, but it's really, really hampered and hindered by this lack of self-knowledge about what's really driving him. And it could be some relationship that he had with his father. We know people from that generation had very difficult relationships with their fathers, much more of a draconian and much more stronger and lack of love type of thing. Or it could be some other piece of his life that's really not discussed in the series about his childhood, or even the recent events of losing his wife. All these things contribute to what I believe to be the underlying character trait of Shulem Shtisel. At the same time, we have mixed feelings for him. We love him in a way, and we see ourselves in him, or pieces of ourselves in him. And we also recognize that that piece of him, that narcissistic piece, rooted in low self-esteem, is something that we should steer clear of and recognize in either ourselves or others as something that's really not a good character trait and something to avoid and something to really work on. And perhaps as this season continues, as these episodes continue, Shulem will have a greater sense of self and understanding of who he is and what drives him. We'll be back with more soon. And actually, finally, I will be doing Season 2, Episode 1, next episode.